مساء الخير واهلا بكم من قلب السفارة الأمريكية بقلب القاهرة. هذا هو أول حوار يجريه سيادة السفير جوناثان كوهين سفير الولايات المتحدة في القاهرة منذ تعيينه سفيرا لمصر في نوفمبر الماضي، لكن طبعا الكوفيد 19 وإجراءات الكورونا يعني فرضت علينا قيودا جميعا. في هذا الحوار هنتكلم على العلاقات الثنائية المصرية الأمريكية، وهي علاقات تشهد تحت هذه الإدارة ربما أفضل أوقاتها. أيضا هنتكلم عن قضايا إقليمية عديدة شائكة ونستطلع المواقف الأمريكية المختلفة من هذه القضايا. Ambassador Cohen, thank you for receiving us. We're back to life.
Well, thank you so much for coming over today.
Thank you. I know maybe this is your first post as an ambassador in an Arab country. You have served before in Iraq. I know you have served in the West Bank. But how is the experience so far? Nearly around 6 months?
It's almost 8 months now that I've been here as ambassador, and it's been a fantastic experience. I'm extremely humbled by having been asked to be in charge of this very important strategic partnership between the United States and Egypt. And I've been touched by the warm reception I've gotten from Egyptians everywhere I've gone, whether they're students or business people or cultural figures or government officials. It's been extremely moving. And I should also say that I've been in the Foreign Service for 35 years. And all that time I've been trying to get assignments here in Egypt.
You've been trying to get assignments in Egypt?
From the first time I bid hard on a job here was in 1989. And I got sent to Jerusalem to work in the West Bank instead. And since then, I've been trying every chance an opening came up here to
Why?
To come
Why
to
is that?
Cairo. Partly because the relationship is so important. Partly because I came here as a tourist in the early 1980s, and I was captivated by the place. I visited the pyramids, I rode a camel, I explored around Cairo, and I decided this was a place that I wanted to come and work, and I studied the Middle East and Egypt in particular. So this is the fulfillment of a very long-standing ambition.
But most of that period, the 8 months, were under the COVID, most of it were under the COVID-19 measures.
Well, fortunately, a little bit less than half. I had about 4 full months before things
so half of
down.
that. How did you manage? I mean, did you get to see the country? Did you get to get acquainted with the people? Or were you just locked down like all of us?
No, those first 4 months, I was extremely active. I came here, I arrived in the country on November 16th, presented my credentials the 17th, and on the 18th was at a major trade promotion event with many business leaders, American companies, visiting US representatives from the Department of Commerce, and a large number of Egyptian cabinet officials. And my fast start just continued. Over the next 4 months, I got to Sharm el-Sheikh twice, to Aswan, to Alexandria twice, to North Sinai, to Ain Sokna, to areas all around Cairo, met as many people as I could, hosted a number of large receptions here, both for special visitors, like during the Cairo Film Festival, when we had not just leaders from the Egyptian film industry here, but also their American counterparts. And that was really a great moment to be able to bring together these great American leaders in their field with their Egyptian counterparts and watch them interact. But also alumni from our exchange programs, visiting former ambassadors, some of whom you interviewed when they were here.
Yes. Now Egypt is opening up. Aviation is coming back, and the question that everybody wants to know: when will the consulate start getting visas applications, start receiving visas applications? When will people start going to the U.S.?
I'm afraid I can't give you an answer. Of course, if you have a visa already, people can go. People have been going, but the challenge of opening up the consular section, like for any government office during the time of COVID, is one that will be guided by first concerns for people's safety and health. And to put a lot of people together in a waiting room is something we just can't do yet. There are a number of other factors, and Washington has to help make the decisions on this. So As we are able to provide more information, of course, we will through our embassy website, but I can't give you a prediction right now.
Do you have a timeline?
Not yet. It'll be conditions-based.
Conditions-based, meaning there will be travel restrictions? What are the conditions?
No, meaning that there will be, to open up the consulate, that we'll have to see what the situation is like in terms of public health and getting people together in a waiting room.
Yeah, but if people want to get treated, they have medical reasons, if students,
Right.
what can they do?
For emergencies, people should contact the consulate. For every other category, we just have to wait and see.
Egypt and the U.S. have had a long-standing strategic relationship, going back to for decades now, in all fields, military, economic, political, and we are witnessing under the current U.S. administration maybe one of the best times of that relation. Why do you think that? What are the pillars of that close ties, of these close ties now?
Well, you've hit on a number of them. I think the main reason we have such close ties is because our national interests are aligned. And they line up through the categories of military security, economics and trade, politics and regional issues, people-to-people exchanges and culture. And I can talk a little bit about each of those. My ambition during my time here as ambassador is to further deepen and strengthen that partnership. To work for an Egypt that is strong, secure, and prosperous, because that's in America's interests. So in the military field, we're working together to strengthen Egypt's counterterrorism capabilities, its border security, and its defense modernization. In the political space, we're trying to increase the trade and investment and continue our development assistance to try and build an Egypt that is economically prosperous in the future. And also to benefit American companies, because it's good for our American economy, it's good for the Egyptian economy, and it creates jobs in both of our countries. In the political space, we listen to and consult with Egypt on all of the issues that our countries care about, and we've seen the positions that we've staked out on the GERD in Libya, for example, and I know we'll come back to that. And in the people-to-people area, we're continuing to do exchanges. And now, in time of COVID, when we haven't been able to physically send people, we've been trying to find innovative ways to do programming through things like bringing an Egyptian NBA player for a group chat with an Egyptian audience to talk about his experiences playing in the NBA.
I will go into detail in every one of that, but let me ask you, how strategic is this relation to the United States itself? We have a common sense, maybe it's wrong, that the relations under a Republican president or a Republican administration is also far better than under a Democrat. That's why everybody's looking up to the coming November elections. Is it?
Well, you know, as I said, I've been in the Foreign Service for 35 years, and I've worked for every administration since Ronald Reagan, and every administration has considered the partnership with Egypt to be strategic and important. It's one of the reasons that I wanted to work here so much for all these years. And I'm convinced that the importance of the relationship to both of our countries transcends the politics of the day. It's also maybe interesting to remember that we started having a strategic partnership really under Jimmy Carter, a Democratic administration,
yes,
because of the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. And that strategic partnership has continued and deepened and strengthened. And the United States has invested billions of dollars and countless hours of work in partnership to make sure that it stays strong.
Let me go into detail in all the fields you have talked about. And let me start by the economic field. Good relation, trade has jumped up by 44%.
Actually more.
More?
Since 2016, it's up 76%.
76% since 2016. So 76% up. Can we go beyond trades? Can we go more into investments? Investments are very limited. Last year, I think 19, it's only 1.5.
But Egypt's total investment in 2019 from direct foreign investment sources was $9 billion. 1.6 billion of that was from the United States. So we're already a significant investor here. We're the third largest investor in Egypt. Egypt is our #1 investment destination for direct foreign investment in Africa, 4 years in a row, and our #2 in the Middle East and North Africa region. That said, I'm committed to working to try and increase it. And we'll come back to some of the things that are going on.
What is your agenda to do that? What is your agenda to attract more American companies, to push for more investments, FDI, from the United States into Egypt?
Well, American companies are interested. And as I mentioned, my very first day after I presented my credentials, I was engaged with them, with the business leaders and with the Egyptian government officials to try and see if we couldn't help bring them together, because I think there are a lot of great opportunities for American businesses here. So I'm spending a lot of time talking to American business community representatives, including AmCham and the U.S.-Egypt Business Council and others, to make sure that they have an eye on the opportunities that are here, that they take advantage of them, that when they bid on them, I advocate on their behalf with whoever's letting the contract, whether it's the government or a private company here. We also think there are lots of great partnerships for American companies with Egyptian partners, and we've seen some of that. A couple, and the statistics that we talked about were through 2019, so mostly things that happened before I got here. Since I got here, a couple, just as examples of the major deals that have been done. Noble Energy, which is a company out of Houston, Texas, is doing the pipeline between Israel and Egypt for gas, natural gas. That's a $15 billion project. Bechtel won an almost $6 billion petrol refinery contract for a refinery that'll be near the Suez Canal. And SpaceX, which captured the world's attention and imagination last month when it brought a couple American astronauts to the International Space Station, has been awarded a contract to put the next Nilesat satellite into orbit. So we also have a very large agricultural import operation. Soybeans are a very big import of the United States. We've also brought into Egypt dairy cattle. So we're doing everything from soybeans to satellites.
So what is needed from the side of Egypt? What is needed from the Egyptian economy to attract more American businesses for investment?
The good news is that Egypt did a lot of the hard work during the years leading up to 2019 through the austerity program, the IMF reforms. So the fundamentals of the economy were in good shape. And Egypt, even with COVID, is one of the few economies that's projected to have positive economic growth in the year ahead. So that on its own is attractive. Beyond that, we are working for better transparency, more intellectual protection for copyrights, the things that make a business investment a more secure proposition. And I would say Egypt's on a good path. There's more work to do.
More work to do on what fields exactly? Copyright and? Copyright
protections, transparency, ease of doing business, bureaucracy, which are things that Egyptian businesses wrestle with as well. And it's a competitive marketplace. So, when I have this conversation with Egyptian partners, look around the neighborhood, see who's doing something better, maybe you can learn from and adapt. Talk to the businesses that are interested and see what would make them decide to close a deal that they might be hesitant about, and try and adapt to those things.
You have talked about the energy companies, the oil companies, and actually Egypt is trying to be a regional hub for gas. And I know the US is taking place at the Mediterranean Forum as an observer. How can the US help Egypt becoming a regional hub for gas?
Well, partly it's through investment. And the largest American investor in Egypt is an energy company, an oil and gas company. And a number of the American major oil and gas companies have been in Egypt for many, many years. So we're encouraging them to continue doing their work, both upstream and downstream. Noble Energy and the gas pipeline I already discussed. And we are actively involved in the diplomacy of helping Egypt become a regional energy hub. As you mentioned, through being an observer in the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. But if you went to the Egypt Petroleum Show back in January, the number of American companies, big ones, small ones, medium-sized ones, that were there wanting to get a piece of the market here was overwhelming. And I think that speaks very well and promisingly of Egypt's potential.
Do you think Egypt has the qualifications of becoming a regional gas hub?
I think it does. I think Egypt can become a regional gas hub by continuing to work on the development that you have already put in place. I think things are moving in a very positive direction. That's why the major energy companies are interested in doing business here.
The QIZ, which is the Qualified Industrial Zones, which is a program between the three countries, Egypt, the US, and Israel, has been doing also very well. It allows for imports into the United States free of tax. Can this be expanded to other products other than garments? It's only mainly garments now.
Absolutely, and we've been making a very strong suggestion that it try and diversify, that the companies working out of the Qualified Industrial Zone look at other products from high-tech to medium manufactured goods. Egypt sold about $1 billion worth of goods from the QIZ last year, but almost all of it was textiles, garments. So we think there's a lot of scope for growth there.
The U.S. has supported Egypt a lot in Egypt's request to get an IMF program. Did Egypt request the U.S., the American help with other institutions?
I'm not aware, but I know we've supported Egypt's requests in the IMF. One of the reasons we supported the packages in the IMF is because Egypt has done the hard work of the reforms. And again, most of that work predated my arrival here. So I'm pleased to see that Egypt is benefiting from that hard work it did over
Let's go to the military assistance, which is also a pillar of the relation between Egypt and the U.S. And Egypt has received around, what, $50 billion of assistance since the peace treaty?
Yes, it's about $50 billion of U.S. investment in Egypt's military over these 40 years. And that is both in hardware and in training. Right now, and it's led to Egypt having a very large F-16 fleet. There are over 200 F-16 fighter jets, over 1,000 M1A1 main battle tanks. The ships that patrol the Mediterranean coast and the Red Sea coast, a number of them were donated by the United States. The air defense system that protects Cairo and the Suez Canal was from the U.S. And we're continuing to work, as I mentioned, on counterterrorism and border security. Two of our ongoing projects are providing border sensors along the western and southern borders so that Egypt can detect when any unauthorized aircraft, vehicle, pedestrian, or tunnel crosses the frontier. And we have provided about 1,400 mine-resistant ambush vehicles, they're the armored vehicles that our soldiers use in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And that's meant to protect the Egyptian soldiers from IEDs, roadside bombs.
What's in the pipeline still in the 2020 fiscal year?
Pipeline in 2020 it's hard to talk about because the fiscal years end up, the 2020 money isn't being expended yet. The 2019 money is being used for some of the things that I've discussed. A few things also on coming are upgrades of the F-16 fleet and of Apache helicopters, and continuing work on the border sensors and the border security piece.
What is the future of this, you call it investment in the military, AID? What is the future of the military AID, since we keep on hearing different voices coming out of the Congress talking about cuts, talking about actually sometimes opposing that military assistance. So what is the future of that military assistance?
The military assistance has stayed pretty consistent at around $1.3 billion a year over the time period in question. And I think that is, while it's always hard to predict because ultimately the number gets decided by Congress in consultation with the administration, I expect that number will stay about the same going forward. For the military, for the military assistance. An important part of the military assistance that I didn't address is training. And we've trained about over 15,000 Egyptian military personnel, including several hundred a year who go to the United States. And of those, some go to our premier military academies. So there is a long, deep tradition of our militaries working together and knowing each other well. You mentioned USAID, which is the non-military side of the assistance. And while we've invested about $50 billion in Egypt's military, we've also invested about $30 billion in Egypt's development. And that has been both preserving the past and helping Egypt to build for a better future. People may not know, but USAID money, which means US taxpayer money, went to preserve a number of important cultural sites in Egypt, including the Sphinx, which was being damaged by groundwater, including the temple at Komombo near Aswan and the catacombs in Alexandria. In addition to the historical preservation work, we've done about $3.5 billion worth of work in water and sanitation. The sewer system in Alexandria was built by American tax money. Wastewater treatment plants in Cairo also were built by USAID. And we've just finished a desalination plant in North Sinai that will provide water for agriculture and aquaculture to help people with their livelihoods up there. So on infrastructure, on water, also on education, we've built about 2,000 schools and trained over 100,000 primary school teachers here. And we, in the health sector, we've trained about 14,000 community health workers, helped eradicate polio, contributed to the fight against hepatitis C, and most recently contributed over $3 million to the Egyptian Red Crescent to help its 30,000 health professionals and volunteers fight the COVID pandemic around the country.
Let me go back to the military side again. How true are the concerns of Washington over the Russian arm deal to Egypt? There has been a lot of reports on that. Are you concerned?
The United States wants Egypt to have the best military equipment that it can get, and we think the best military equipment comes from the United States. When I talk to, and when we're talking about fighter jets in particular, when I talk to fighter pilots, to American fighter pilots who've flown the jets and seen their competition in action, they are absolutely convinced that the Russian jets are not as good as the American jets. So I would say buy American because they're better, first of all. But second of all, we want Egypt's defense capability to be interoperable with us and with our other allies. And Russian equipment just is not, especially not something advanced like a fighter jet. Plus, in 2017, the US Congress passed legislation that requires sanctions for anyone conducting a major purchase of Russian military equipment. And that's not targeted at our partners, it's targeted to prevent the Russian leadership from profiting after their activity in Ukraine. So for all of these reasons, we would be concerned if Egypt moved forward with major Russian military purchases. And I should point to the example of Turkey, which moved forward with the acquisition of an S-400 air defense system. And because of that, we were forced to drop them out of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program.
Yes, but they were not sanctioned. Turkey was not.
But that just shows. That just shows how strong even the administration feels about this, not just the Congress.
Yes, but Egypt needs to diversify.
So please diversify with interoperable platforms. You know, there are lots of platforms out there that can operate seamlessly with the 200 F-16s you have. That's our pitch.
And I go back to Turkey. Turkey was not sanctioned.
But they were dropped out of the F-35 program, which was they were supposed to have part of the production in their country. This cost them a very high price.
Peacekeeping forces has been a pillar of stability in Sinai and in the whole region, actually, since the peace agreement. But there have been news that the U.S. wants to pull out of the peacekeeping force and pull out. I think the number was reduced from 700 to 450. Yeah. Are you planning to pull out the American peacekeeping force?
We constantly look at our numbers, but the peacekeeping force in Sinai is, as you said, a very important legacy of the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And the United States leadership in that force remains something to which we're committed. My predecessor in this job went on to be the Director General of the force and is in that job now. One of my very first visits in this job was to the change of command for the multinational force observers in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I visited their forward operating base in North Sinai as well. We remain committed to the operation of that force as an effective peacekeeper.
So you're not pulling out of the peacekeeping force. You're not pulling out American troops.
as I said, we're constantly looking at the numbers. But right now, no decision has been made to pull out of the peacekeeping force.
But you must be taking in consideration that Egypt is combating terrorism in Sinai. So
this force doesn't work on counterterrorism.
I know, but
and we are, of course, aware that of the struggle that Egypt is facing with terrorism in the Sinai. And let me take this moment to again express our condolences to the families of the soldiers who've been killed in that effort. You know, one of the things, as I mentioned, we've funded a desalination plant in North Sinai, and we are funding other projects to help with livelihood, to help people earn salary there, with the idea that if people have a way to earn a livelihood, they'll be less tempted to take money from a terrorist organization that wants to pay them to plant a roadside bomb. So we're in this as well, and trying to help Egypt to address its problem there.
Yeah, regarding the peacekeeping force, you said you're reviewing the numbers all the time. Have you been talking to the Egyptians about that in case of pulling out the American troops?
We have. We've been talking to the Egyptians and the Israelis, and we're aware that both countries want to see a continued American leadership in the force.
Exactly. Let me go to the region, and there is a widespread sense that among observers that the U.S. foreign policy is disengaging with the Middle East. The interest, the Middle East is no longer the focal point of the interest of the United States. The United States is going inwards or interested more in East Asia. How true is this sense?
I don't believe that the United States has shifted its focus from the Middle East. I've been hearing the same theme for many years, and for all those years, the size of our embassies in the region, the size of our aid programs in the region, the size of our military deployments in the region, and the level of diplomatic activity in the region all suggest that that's not the case. There is no region where we do more diplomacy, where we have more international relations focus than the Middle East. And for Egypt, Egypt's not just the Middle East, it's also Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. And both of those are areas where we have increasing US focus.
Let me go into Libya. The US position from Libya does not seem to be very clear. There are conflicting messages. And there is also a common belief that Washington is green-lighting the Turkish intervention into Libya just to hold off the Russian one. What is the American position from Libya?
Let me be very clear.
Please.
The United States opposes all foreign intervention in Libya. And we believe that it is imperative that a ceasefire be respected, that the UN arms embargo be respected, and that the parties re-engage in a political negotiation to bring a Libyan solution under UN auspices to Libya.
Fine, but what are you doing beyond believing in ceasefire and believing in political solution? What is the United States doing? The United States is not just a country, it's the superpower.
So we're engaged in very active diplomacy, and my president and my Secretary of State had conversations in the last 10 days with your president and your foreign minister about Libya. So we will continue to engage and use the tools that we have. We also have a very active ambassador to Libya who meets with all the parties in the Libyan constellation. And we're giving strong support to the UN mission there, which right now is led by a former colleague of mine, a former American diplomat. So we are, I think our position on Libya is clear.
But again, most of the statements coming out of the State Department, of the AFRICOM, of all the institutions are talking about committing to ceasefire, opposing military escalation. How are you going to push that to be on the ground? What is the role of the United States to have this happen?
The role of the United States is to engage in active diplomacy as a first step. We're also in contact with the parties that have troops on the ground there, which we don't. So we're not in a position to go beyond what I've said. But we take strong positions in the UN, in the international community, in the 5+5 talks, in the Berlin process,
Egypt has proposed the Cairo Declaration, and then when the international community did not enforce ceasefire on the ground, President Sisi warned that there might be Egyptian military intervention to protect Egyptian national interests and Libyans as well. Do you support the Egypt Declaration, and what if the GNA went on and they went into Sirte?
Well, we support a ceasefire before it gets to that point. We also support Egypt's security. So that's what I can say about it.
What if the GNA went into Sirte? And this is the red line that President Sisi said if that was crossed, then there will be a direct military intervention.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that we say it's absolutely urgent that an immediate ceasefire be put in place.
You are talking to the GNA.
We are.
Did you mention Sirte? Are you talking about Sirte?
We're talking about everything. We're talking about the battle lines. We're talking about the future of oil production. We're talking about the arms embargo. We're talking about foreign mercenaries and foreign forces needing to leave the country. We talk about this with all the different parties.
In the statements coming out of those talks, especially the AFRICOM, they are talking, or the State Department, they are talking about demobilization of the militias, taking out the arms, and fine. How are you monitoring this on the ground?
Well, I have to defer to my colleague, the ambassador to Libya, because I'm not on the ground there and I don't have that personal involvement. My piece of this is Egypt's interests and our relationship with Egypt as far as Libya goes. So, and those conversations are frequent and quite detailed.
Is the U.S. talking to both parties? Because most of the statements are coming out from talks with the GNA. Are you talking to Haftar?
We talk to everybody.
You talk to everybody. Let me go back to Turkey. Why does it seem that the U.S., you say that the U.S. is against any foreign intervention, but why does it seem that the U.S. is looking the other way while Turkey, which is a NATO member, is flooding Libya with mercenaries, flooding Libya with militias, with arms against the UN embargo? This is against what the U.S. believes in. This is, I mean, it is...
Well, I think my statement at the top of this part of the discussion was very clear. We oppose all foreign intervention in Libya, period.
Yes, but Turkey...
And my colleague in Ankara has this conversation with the Turkish government. So he's the one who can tell you best what the Turks say.
But there is a risk of an ISIS hotbed near Europe and near Egypt. So this is, I mean, this is against, there is no... it looks like the U.S. is condoning this. There is no statement that is opposing to that.
What I can tell you is that we oppose foreign intervention in Libya. We support an immediate ceasefire, a respect for the UN arms embargo, and a return to political talks under the UN lead.
Are you not worried to see another Syria?
We are extremely worried. And that's why one of the reasons that the UN part of this is so important. Because we saw what happens when Turkey and Russia do a deal with each other in Syria and the consequences. And that's not something we would want to see happen in Libya, and it's not something that Egypt would want to see happen in Libya.
Definitely.
I think the US and Egypt are in absolute agreement that there is no military solution to the Libya crisis.
Let me go to another issue, which is the Ethiopian dam or the GERD. And I know that the US, of course, has helped a lot recently at the UN, the session requested for the Security Council by Egypt, and also, of course, in facilitating the talks in Washington. Do you think the move to the Security Council was the right one? How important was it?
I think it was the right one. I think it made clear that the international community supports an agreement that takes into account the needs and interests of all three countries involved. And that in and of itself is extremely important. And as Ambassador Kraft said in the Security Council session the other night, we reaffirmed our commitment to work with all three parties until they get to a final agreement. We believe that with goodwill and cooperation and dialogue, a solution is within reach. And we called on all parties to refrain from any statements or actions that could undermine that goodwill.
The American position is clear from the GERD, not to take any unilateral action without a deal. But again, what if Ethiopia went ahead with filling the dam without an agreement?
Well, and again, like with the Libya example, we hope we don't get to that. And we've got a few weeks to work hard with the parties to get them to a solution that we know can be reached.
Are you optimistic about the African negotiations that are going on now?
But we take note of it, and if there is a way we can help the partners, we stand ready to assist.
I think you'll be an observer in those talks, right?
I believe so.
Again, on the GERD, as an ex-UN rep yourself, can Egypt go back to the Council if, God forbid, the African talks did not work? How can the Council work? Can there be, Egypt also drafted a resolution. Can this resolution be helpful? How can the Council help?
Well, let's take it one step at a time. First, let's see how these talks go. Fingers crossed, and with a lot of effort from all the sides, hopefully we'll get to a solution, and we won't have to revisit the question of UN activity.
Washington has helped a lot in facilitating the talks in January and even before that. But at the last minute, Ethiopia went out and withdrew and did not sign and said that Washington is pressuring Ethiopia and is biased to Egypt. But there was no reaction from Washington on that.
We believe that we have maintained a position of supporting all three countries, recognizing the importance of the Nile to all three in their history and their futures. And we want to maintain our position as a partner, a potential partner for all three to get to a solution.
On the peace process, what is the future of the Trump plan? It has been announced, but then what is happening on the ground now?
We actually have one of our Middle East peace envoys in Israel right now. But I can tell you, and you know, I worked in the West Bank during the first Intifada. I ran our aid projects in Palestinian communities. My whole career I've been involved in this conversation, and we want now what we wanted then, what we've always wanted, which is a peace that allows the Israelis and the Palestinians to live in safety and prosperity. To get there right now, we hope that the Palestinians will engage us in a conversation. And that's been a missing piece for the last while.
Also, the shift of the American foreign policy towards the peace process and the Palestinian has been worrying in the Arab world. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and then the Trump plan, and then the annexation or the proposed annexation. Can the U.S. be a fair broker when it has clearly taken sides?
Well, we've expressed our vision. And we've asked our friends who have influence with the Palestinians to try and persuade them to come and talk to us about it. They know what our administration sees as the path forward, and we would like to hear from them about what they see as constructive or not in that proposal. But not having the conversation doesn't help us. And what we hope really is that they'll make the brave choice that Egypt made in 1979 to engage in the conversation and get the best deal for themselves that they can. But
the Palestinians say that what are we going to negotiate about? I mean, everything has been taken away. What are we negotiating about?
They can't find out where the parameters are if they don't engage in the conversation.
What about the annexation? Are you giving a green light to Israel for the annexation?
Again, you know, our envoy is there now, so I would have to refer you to him and our ambassador to Israel, who had the most current conversations.
Let me move to Iran, and the U.S. policy of maximum pressure does not seem to be working very well. Iran is going on with its nuclear program. The threats to the Arab world is going on. Threats to your allies in the Gulf states, the intervention in Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. I mean, it's all over. Are you reconsidering that policy?
We believe the maximum pressure policy is working. We think that the regime in Tehran is under more economic and political pressure than they've ever been under before. We believe that they are less able to send funds and support to their surrogates in all the places that you mentioned. And all of the destabilizing activity in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon was taking place before we pulled out of the JCPOA. What the JCPOA did was it allowed funds to flow to the regime, which then recycled them to the non-state, the irresponsible non-state actors in each of those countries to fuel conflict, and it leads to what Tom Friedman characterized when he talked about Qasem Soleimani and his death as a foolish policy, turning situations all around the region into divisive Shia versus Sunni struggles at the cost of money that should have gone to the well-being of Iranians in Iran, and instead was being put in the hands of militia commanders in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and elsewhere.
Do you think that the U.S. is doing enough with this policy, the maximum pressure, to defend its Gulf allies?
We talk to all of the Gulf countries constantly and do what we can to make sure we're supporting their defense requirements.
Now life is back into Egypt, we hope so. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to visit? What is the first thing or the first place you want to visit now that you can move a little bit freely?
I have a long list, but at the top of the list, I would say are Luxor, the North Coast.
It's too hot now. North Coast is fine.
So North Coast probably comes first if things open up fast enough and well enough. So I want to travel all along the Nile to Upper Egypt. I mean, I believe strongly I'm the ambassador to Egypt, not the ambassador to Cairo. So I want to make sure I get out and see the country and meet the people everywhere I go and hear their stories and their views of America and share with them what I can about what we're doing in Egypt and what's going on back in the U.S.
Do you watch Egyptian movies?
I do. I think like many of us, I've been spending way too much time on Netflix. And I found a couple of old Omar Sharif movies from the 1950s. And those were wonderful kind of nostalgic glimpses at old Egypt.
Have you been a rugby player?
I was. I played rugby in university and then afterwards in a number of the countries where I was posted.
Egypt does not know rugby, but it knows soccer, football. Have you been following Mohamed Salah, for instance?
Of course, and in fact, I'm told that the only non-controversial thing I can say about soccer is that I love Mohamed Salah.
Absolutely. Exactly. Have you tried Egyptian food?
Of course.
So what do you prefer? What do you like?
I'm a fan of fool.
Food,
and I've had Alexandria-style fool and Cairo-style fool, and I like them both. But I like it better later in the day than for breakfast, I have to say. Yeah, you can chalk me up as a fool fan.
Well, we want to welcome you to Cairo and to Egypt. And we hope you can see you a lot now that things are better. And we hope that the relations between the two countries will always be to the best.
Well, that's what we're working for. So
thank you
very
Ambassador
much.
Cohen.
Thank you, Lamiz.
ونشكركم أعزائي المشاهدين. ده كان حوارنا مع السفير الأمريكي. دقائق وننتقل إلى ساعة السوشيال ميديا.